It's therefore my great pleasure to introduce to you today Mr. Scipione, AO-APM, the ex-Commissioner for the New South Wales Police Force. It's been a pleasure to get to know him a little bit over the last few days, but Andrew started as a police officer when I was 3 years old, so that puts a bit in perspective. It was back in the 80s, very early 80s, and he has a very broad range of experience. He was the commander for the Special Technical Investigation Branch. He was the commander of the Special Crime and Internal Affairs. He was the Chief of Staff to the New South Wales Police Commissioner, and he, of course, becoming a Commissioner in 2007. He was a Deputy Commissioner before that. It's a great pleasure that we can introduce him to you because he decided to retire this year, that freeing up his time and to be able to come and talk to you here today. He has a lot of experience when it comes to changing leadership and changing a culture within a service like the New South Wales Police Force. I think he's a very well-deserved recipient of the Australian Police Medal and National Medal. In 2016, he was also named in the Queen's Birthday Honour List, receiving the office in the General Division of the Order of Australia, and I think that's something to inspire to. In the meantime, Andrew has been married. He's got his lovely wife, Joy, with him here, and they've got 3 children. So amongst being a Commissioner, he's been a father as well and a husband. So without further ado, Andrew, I invite you to come up and talk to us. Thank you.
Well, good morning and thank you. Can I start by simply reflecting on what we've just watched and where we are? Wow, what a building, what an initiative. Joy and I get to move around quite a bit and it's right across the country, and I've got to say, this is probably one of the most impressive buildings I've seen in regional Australia anywhere. And the forethought that's going into the next stage, again, I just think it's wonderful for the town. So you are to be commended. This is not necessarily just because council and government invested into it. At the end of the day, you, the community, own this building, and you should be very, very proud of what you've got here. You almost need to give yourselves a round of applause for it. I think it's so encouraging. And what a pleasure it is for Joy and I, my wife Joy and myself, to be here with you. We've enjoyed some of your hospitality for the last couple of days, and it's been a great time. The weather was really, really good when we got here, and it's reminding us a little bit of home at the moment, we're told, although it's probably better here than it is in Sydney at the moment. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. Great to see so many people out in the morning. Even better that we've had breakfast already, because you never want to stand between 20 police and breakfast. It's a dangerous position to be in, to start talking. So I think we're all good to go, and as has been indicated, I've been asked to come down today and tell you a little bit about my story. I will talk to you a little bit about my professional life, but I'll talk to you a lot about my private life, if you like, in terms of my faith walk. So I think the plan is I'll talk for a bit, and then we'll give the microphones over to you, and then we're in a position to take your questions, and we'll pull up, I think 8:45 it was, realising that you do need to get to the office or to the factory site or the building site, wherever it is you're going to, because today is a Friday and we're all working. So on the back of that, if you're all okay with that, we'll make a start. It is so good to see so many police here today. It almost takes me back to a meal room or to a muster room to see all those blue uniforms. So it's a pleasure to have you here. I will make special mention of you a little later on, so you're not going to get out of this too light. It's indeed a pleasure at any time to have large numbers of police together with community, because at the end of the day, like you own this building, you own these folks too. They're your police. They don't belong to the Commissioner, they don't belong to the government, they belong to you. And so to acknowledge what they do is so important. Well, where did it all start? Well, for me, with a name like Scipione, you know that I wasn't probably a 5th generation Australian. I came here as a young boy. I came here with my family under an assisted passage scheme. I was a 10-pound pom. Now, you normally get in a room of this size at least 1 or 2 10-pound poms For those of you that don't know, that scheme for $20 effectively brought my whole family here. I was 1, my sister was 10, almost 11, and Mum and Dad. We came from London. I was born in London. My mother was born in County Armagh in Northern Ireland, a little place called Lurgan. And my father was born in France, a French mother, Italian father, and he moved to England as a young man. So my story starts a long way away from here, but it certainly was one that wasn't meant to be finished over there. We came and moved into southwestern Sydney. We moved into the Bankstown area. Now, I know that yesterday I met some people who said, we know where Bankstown is, we're from there. For those that don't know, it's one of the older areas in Sydney, out west a little, but it's certainly it's a very, very busy area. It's where I learned a lot of my policing skills, for I was stationed there a little bit later in my career. But as a young fellow growing up, I just fell in love with the country, the notion of being free and being able to go wherever, whenever. We lived on a little creek, and we had parklands around us. So I just lived the life of a normal young boy growing up in Australia. Having said that, my family weren't church folks. You all know that I'm a church man. I didn't come from a church family. My family were just great people that cared for me, looked after me, were there for me and loved me, but we weren't in any way associated with church. It wasn't actually until I was about 12 that I went into the church for the first time. And the reason I went into a church was because there was a young couple that moved into the house next door. They were youth leaders in a local Baptist church, and they would invite me to get involved with some of their activities, and I did that from time to time as a younger boy. But then when I got a little bit older, I actually started going to a youth group, and I was introduced to a whole lot of new people, new friends, and I was introduced to the gospel. I'd never really heard it before, but I had the opportunity as a member of the group to actually just take it all in, to get an understanding of what it all meant. There was another reason I went to youth group. There were these people there called girls. Little did I know, I met one there when I was 14, and we've been married 40 years this year. So, it wasn't love at first sight, I've got to say, having said that. Look, I decided when I was a 14-year-old boy, I can tell you the time, the place, and I can tell you the setting, describe the setting, the house next door where I actually made the decision. I was going to be a Christian. I gave my heart to Jesus in that room. It was the neighbour's room one Tuesday night. And I didn't really know what that meant or what it was going to mean, but I can assure you, as I reflect over my life, and I'm 60 now, as I reflect over those 60 years, I tell you I've made a lot of really important decisions, both in terms of my professional life and my private life. But if we were to focus on some of the decisions I've made as a police officer, some of them have been pretty important. None of them more important than that decision I made when I was a 14-year-old boy in that room next door to the house I lived in 38 Ronald Street at Padstow. None, I can assure you. At 14, a young man that's growing up in a pretty rough old area, to make a decision like that was interesting. I lost a lot of friends, but that was okay. That was okay. The sad thing was that same year, 3 months later, I lost my dad. He died. He died in the house at home of a heart attack on the floor. And I went from being a tearaway young kid who just made this really important decision to being the man in the house. 14-year-old boys, hey, we all need dads, particularly 14-year-old boys. I needed a strong father that was going to guide me, help me, take me through the next chapter in my life, which is often a little bit rocky. Teenagers, it's not always smooth sailing, is it? But my dad wasn't there. He'd at that stage he'd passed away, and so there was Mum and myself, because my sister had married and moved, and she'd moved to Darwin. So she was really on the other side of the nation. But as a young boy, involved in a church, meeting with young people and being influenced by them, I was blessed. I was fortunate in that I was really being looked after. And as I reflect on it now, there were 3 men that we had contact with in the church that Joy and I moved to when we started dating, and then when we got engaged. And as we married, we moved into a church in our local area. And there were 3 men in there that really influenced me. They took me under their wing. They were the men that my father probably would have been or should have been if he was around. Now, they taught me how to be a man. And these are really important times for young boys, particularly. They taught me how to be, when we married, how to be a husband. And then when we had children, they taught me how to be a father. And they didn't have to even articulate it. I watched them, I observed them, I listened to them, and I got those clues. And I know, because I know that if they hadn't been there and given me those clues, this would have been a much tougher journey that I'd been on over so many years. At 14 again, I realised that we weren't going to be able to stay in the house that we're in, because when my parents came here, they purchased a house that had just been built, so it was a new premises, and they got one of those mortgages which was going to last for 35 years, and Dad was gone in 10, a bit over 10. So we had to knuckle down, Mum and I, and we had to work out how we were going to pay this mortgage off. She had to change her shift so that she attracted more in her wages, and I actually had to leave school. So I managed to get through and get a school certificate, and that's where I finished in terms of my formal education in a secondary college. I'd always had plans that perhaps I'd go on and go to university, that I would go on to some professional career, and that wasn't to be. Not at least at that time, anyway. I took on an apprenticeship that lasted a little while for the company that I worked for, even though I was an indentured apprentice, went bankrupt, and they didn't have to get me another job, so I was out of work. At 16, looking for work, particularly as an apprentice in those early days of the 70s when there was a lot of pressure on the building industry and the economy generally. I couldn't get work. I couldn't get a job back in my trade, and I ended up joining the public service. I needed work, I needed to get some money, and in doing that, at that stage as I was growing up, Joy and I started to hang out, and I think we soon realised that we were meant for each other. And I know that we married very young. I was 20, Joy was 21, so she stole me. You wouldn't think so, but having said that, we certainly were ready for whatever it is that God might bring into our lives in terms of a career, not knowing what was really around the corner. Joy came home one day from work and said, I think Customs have got these jobs that are opening up, and long story short, I applied for and was accepted as a preventive officer in Customs. Now, these were the people that you met at the airport when you came through, or the people that searched cargo ships and containers and vessels and aircraft. So I went and applied, was selected, did the training for 12 months and was effectively sworn in. Worked on the waterfront in Sydney and worked on some at the airport, but then moved into the intelligence area and did some work around the narcotics area, because at the time the Federal Narcotics Bureau were part of Australian Customs. And it was at that time that I actually met 3 very, very good New South Wales police officers on a joint operation. The joint operation involved a former cop, Murray Riley, who was involved in importing cannabis into Australia with yachts through New Guinea, and it was a joint operation. We did the job successfully, and these 3 officers said to me, you really should think about joining the New South Wales Police Force. So I did. I joined. I was trained at the old Redfern Barracks. I joined in 1980. I can recall going in there in the first week and For the police in the room, you'll probably understand this. The drill sergeant basically saying, now you need to understand where you people stand in the pecking order. See those police horses and those police dogs, they're higher in rank than you. So I knew that there was only one way to go. And, during all of that time, from when I first made a decision through to when I joined the police force, there was such a rich time of blessing simply because of my wife and my church. As I think back, those difficult, and they are often problematic years of your teens, and as you get into young adulthood, you make a lot of choices. And I've spent a bit of time talking to some of the people here in town about the importance of making good choices. And I'd like to think that my choices were good because I wasn't going the same way as many of my friends. There were a number of my friends that I'd grown up with from when we were very young that had either died or a couple of them had gone to prison. Heroin was a big problem in Sydney in those days, and drugs had been really problematic in that Bankstown area. One of them had died on a motorcycle. Again, that was one of the main reasons why I actually had to change my friends, because I had to make that choice to make sure that I had a good future, and I'm so blessed that I had somebody to do the journey with Joy. Well, we grew up in the same area, not that far apart, maybe one station away on the rail line, but we moved into the local area, and I can recall we bought our first house, and I was talking to Ken, who told me that his first house cost him $3,400. I think ours first cost, same year, ours cost $37,000 or something, and we didn't have two razzoos to rub together, but we had a whole lot of friends. We had a wonderful church. We had a lot of love and care from those that were around us, and throughout all of that time, God was there for us in every situation. We have 3 children. You've heard that. We're in the local church. We had a little boy. I was working at that stage as a detective in Bankstown. I did my designation there as a detective. And they were bad days in many ways. They were good days, but professionally we were going through some really tough times as an organisation. We had a range of heroes in the New South Wales Police Force that were really villains. You know, you can't mention names like Roger Rogerson and think of anything but trouble. Roger's currently serving a life sentence in a prison in New South Wales. I think his most recent escapade was where he decided they were going to rip off a drug dealer, kill the drug dealer, dump the drug dealer, and then walk away thinking everything was okay. Well, if that's the culture of an organisation that's meant to be there to keep people safe, then I'll give it away. And I almost did. I can remember at Bankstown Detectives one night, finishing work, getting into the car. Joy was there, my eldest son Ben was a baby in the car, and I said, I've had enough. I just can't do this. The corruption's too much. And Joy quickly got me around to realising how stupid that was to think that way, and that I needed to rethink it, and I did. And I stayed. Again, little did I know that one day I'd be standing here talking to you as a former commissioner of the New South Wales Police Force. Through that time, I know that the opportunities that I was afforded was something that was rather unique. I joined, as I say, I started work in my local police area, like working in the local area here, and in the progression of my career, I worked at every rank. Throughout that time, I moved into criminal investigations. I then went into organised crime investigation. There was a brand new body that was known as the National Crime Authority, created in 1984. I got seconded there. I was taken there for 3 months and ended up staying 7 years. That can be good or it can be bad for your career because you're out of your parent organisation. But for me, it worked out quite fine. And I had a great time, but it wasn't that easy for my family. And, some people often ask me, what's the greatest regret you've got in your career? And I've got to tell you, one of the greatest regrets is the fact that I was so involved in what I was doing that I probably didn't have enough time for my family, for my wife and my children. And it's a reality in life. It's difficult to get the work, family balance right, but we have to. We have to. So I made it my priority. If I wasn't working, if I wasn't at work, I'd be at home and I wouldn't be anywhere else. And tried to get it right there. Understanding, though, that I had a responsibility as a parent and as a father to look after my family and to stay close to God, and that's been the key to my life. I've got to say that as I moved out of organised crime investigation after those years, I moved into covert operations, and I ended up running a covert surveillance group, an electronic surveillance group, which was not an enormous group. There's about 100 people full-time doing that work in New South Wales. It's a bit bigger today, but having said that, we're now talking 1992. And in being part of that, it was all new, it's exciting. It afforded me the opportunity to train in so many different places. I'd trained across the world. That took me away quite a bit. We were running operations across the world, working with other agencies in America, in the UK. And again, that took me away from the real things that were important. But having the level of support that I did, I've got to say, any police officer in this room, or I think any real professional in this room, would know that without your wife, if you're married, men, if you think you could do this by yourself, I think it's time to think again. I could not have done what I have done all these years without my wife being there with me, not behind me, but walking beside me, often in front of me, in terms of her prayer support and her support of me professionally, in terms of freeing me up to go and do the things that I had to do to train. I just think through some of the opportunities at university to go on and complete master's degrees in business administration, to also go on and finalise, do a lot of training offshore in FBI and Quantico. It's been a wonderful opportunity that I would never have had if I didn't have somebody to do this journey through life with. And this was the young girl that I met when I was 14 in that youth group. Now, starting to understand how important that decision was that I made all those years ago. Because whilst I didn't think things were going well, my father died and I lost my job, things were falling into place. God had a plan, and he had a plan for us. Well, I moved on from there. I can recall we had a brand new commissioner because we went through some tough times as an organisation. We had a Royal Commission into corruption. We earned that. We earned that. And I can tell you there was a lot of tears and a lot of problems that came from that, but we earned every single one of those because we were doing things that shouldn't have been done. We were police. We'd betrayed the trust that were given to us by community, and there was a price to be paid. And anyone that knows the history of the New South Wales Police Force knows that there was a tremendous toll. But, these are the things that have to happen. I got a phone call not long after it finished because we had a brand new police commissioner came into the country named Peter Ryan. Peter was given the job of going in and changing the culture of the New South Wales Police Force. I thought at the time there'd probably be more chance of him getting down to Sydney Harbour with a stick and changing the tide. Seriously. But he started the journey. It took its toll on him, but I've got to say, it made such a difference to us. It gave heart to those in the organisation that wanted to see change and knew that change could happen. It was going to be a hard slog. I got a phone call from Peter Ryan in 1997, and the first, you guys will know this, I took the phone. I was at that stage a superintendent in charge of a covert area. Phone call, it's Peter Ryan here, and I thought I had a G up on the phone. I thought somebody's G'ing me up here. Yes, what can I do for you? He said, I want to see you in my office. Now, and by this stage I'm starting to think it's a pretty good cover of his accent, or it's him. It was him. Now, to get called down to the Commissioner's office like that, there was a whole lot of sort of bloodletting going on in the organisation. A lot of people were being let go, to use another term. I went down there thinking, I have no idea what's going to happen here. He said to me, I want you to come down here and work with me for a little while. I said, fine. Doing what? And he said, I want you to be my chief of staff. Now, I didn't know that there was such a thing as a chief of staff. You know, little did I know that I would become have a PhD in disaster management before the end of the year, realising that I was going down there to do this job. I can assure you that when I got there, I made it my business to say, you need to know a little bit about me, Commissioner, because you probably don't know anything about me. I've never met you before. This is who I am. And I could simply lay out my credentials. I'm a family man, I'm a Christian. I live in this part of Sydney. I won't lie for you. Thought I better put that in. If I do it, it'll be straight up and down. I understand if you don't want me to be here, I'm happy to go back to my command. He said, that's the reason you're here. He said, because I know you without ever having met you, because you trained in a place called Fort Halstead in London. And he says, I reached back to the UK to find out who was in the New South Wales Police Force that I could trust, and your name come up. Because they know you're a Christian. They know you're a church guy. And that you're honest, because I had trained with them in the lead up to and preparing for when we were moving into the Olympic Games. And so I started working for him. I stayed with him until just after the Olympic Games. And learnt a lot. There's an old saying in policing that you should learn from mistakes, preferably someone else's. I learnt a lot. And having had that opportunity, again, realising that the work that I was going into, which I had little knowledge of at the time, was really going to be taxing. It was something where if I didn't have God with me, it wouldn't have come together for us. There were many a night when, I probably suspect that there were some days when I was home and I may as well not have been at home. I was working a phone, or I was dealing with a crisis, or I was arranging for something to happen. We had Thredbo landslides, we had, you name it. Then we were getting ready for the things that were programmed like Y2K, but more importantly, the Olympics, which was a mammoth undertaking. And but the opportunity to take that in and to learn from it was enormous. It was something that no other chief of staff in the modern era had done. So I had that opportunity and benefited enormously from it. From there, I was moved into, and as you've heard, I was promoted to the rank of Assistant Commissioner and in charge of internal affairs. Now, if you wanted a tough gig in New South Wales, go and be the boss of internal affairs. But you know what? Again, God was good, God was gracious. I had to go down there and change that structure, change the culture in there. And then from there move through into the rank of Deputy Commissioner. And then finally, as you've heard, 2007, I was made the Commissioner. I stayed 10 years. I was the 21st Police Commissioner in the history of the New South Wales Police Force. Now, to give you a snapshot of that, New South Wales Police is a pretty big organisation. It's the oldest force in Australia. It's the largest. We have sworn and unsworn just over 21,000 members. It's a big budget organisation. My last budget, my last year, was $3.2 billion. And the trick to it was understanding that, you know what, none of it was about me. My time there was an appointment. It was an appointment that God had for me. And we truly believe that this was almost where we were to do our ministry. We had to be good servants. And I realised very early on, as I've already said to you, I didn't own the police force. I just happened to be a steward at the time, looking after, like your current commissioner is looking after your police, first and foremost, then looking after community, the 8 million or so in New South Wales. That was my job. I didn't own the police force. They owned me because I was their leader. I was responsible for them, and I had to make sure that they got what they needed to be able to do the job. And what a privilege and an honour that was for this kid who came as a baby who really had no right to stand there as the commissioner in this jurisdiction that had, as I say, the longest history. I mean, the organisation was created in 1862, but before that it goes right back to, I can read, and I was reading not long ago, about its origins back into 1788, in the first year that we were a nation. And even when all of the groups that were the beginnings come together on the 1st of March 1862 and the new legislation that empowered the New South Wales Police Force came into being, I was reflecting only yesterday to a group. Abraham Lincoln hadn't been assassinated. The Civil War was raging and they were still selling slaves down on the docks in New York. Amazing to think, here I was, a kid from London, in charge. Well, let me tell you, none of that was as a result of what I did. Somebody said to me only in the last couple of days, now, did you ever aspire to be a commissioner? And I said, I never even aspired to be a police officer. That wasn't something that I was driven by. Throughout my whole career, I have made one application. And that was because I had to, and that was for a position known as commissioner, because by law you had to be an applicant under the legislation. And so all of those appointments have been by direct appointment. So my job wasn't to open the door, it was just to walk through the ones that God opened, and he opened a lot. He opened a heck of a lot. And again, let me tell you, I'm no different than anyone in this room. There's no airs and graces. We're not special people. We're just people that know the Lord and have that love and that trust and that belief that he looks after those that commit to him. And that's all we could do. We had no real other option. I couldn't have done what I did for 10 years without having God there in control. You just couldn't do it physically. And you've got a very capable and a very good commissioner. I know the people on the selection panel, and they chose wisely. And I say that because his heart's good. He's a professional, he knows, but his heart's good. And having said that, you need a little bit more going for you than just having served for a long time or come from a family where the last 3 generations have been police to make it work. When you've got a business the size of the business that we had, as I said, stewarding, being responsible for 21,000 and administering, again, not $1 of it was mine, but $3.2 billion of public money, you need to have a little bit of knowledge about how the business ticks. And so I was, again, as I say, just the whole journey through my preparation, through my education, through my training, through my development, through to my ultimate responsibility in leadership, it became very, very clear to me, and particularly as I got closer to retirement, that I was punching well above my weight. I had a God that cared and was taking me through. I had a family that mattered and cared. And as I wrap up, I reflect on the privilege it was to be a cop. And policing's the same the world over. You feel affiliated no matter where you go. You can be a police officer in Tasmania, you go across to America, connect, and you feel like you're part of a family, because you are. And these folks here that are your police, you need to understand that they are yours, and that they are the ones that keep you safe. And look, even as recently as yesterday, I was in the Don, the college. Is there anyone here from the Don this morning? No? Impressive. But I was more impressed by the police officer up there, Bobby. And we're talking. And, I talked to him about his situation, his career, what he's done, where he's been. And we started talking about domestic violence, because I was down with you folks on Wednesday, I think it was, and we're talking about what is arguably your biggest crime problem down here, and someone raised domestic violence. And I started talking to Bobby about it, and he told me about a job that he went to when he was pretty junior, and he went in and it was a domestic violence situation. As a result of it, long story short, he was attacked by some dogs. They got him around the throat and they got him on the arm, and he said if it wasn't for my colleagues I probably would have died there. And he took great pride in showing us these scars on this big gun that he had there. And you know, I thought back and I'm thinking he was sort of brushing it off with a little bit of jest, saying, you know, well, it's just another day in the life. I'm thinking, no, it's not another day in the life. We couldn't pay you for, you know, we don't pay people like Bobby and these folks for what they do. We pay them for what they're prepared to do. And that's give it all. Not come home, finished, dead. And it happens. It does happen. On my watch, in my time, arguably the most difficult thing Joy and I ever had to do was bury cops that died on the job, that were murdered. Really, really hard, because it wasn't just there's a service, we bury them and then we forget about them. No. That's when the journey starts. And that's when communities really start to bind with us, because you do realise then just how important these people are. So, you know, I know that your Commissioner takes great pride in what you do. He's always been an absolutely strong, staunch advocate for Taspol. And we could see the level of professionalism every time we come down here. So again, as I wrap up now and as we go to some of your questions, let me just finish by saying, as a community, you should be very proud of them. Please, if you can, give them the support that they deserve and need, realising that, you know, these people aren't robots. They're people. You know that because they come from your families. There's probably someone related to somebody in this room. They're just men and women just like you and I, and yet they'll go and do extraordinary things. So important that I take this opportunity to give you guys that recognition, because you probably don't get it often enough. I'm sure you don't get it often enough, and you deserve it. Yeah. Thank you. So folks, in the short time that I've got allocated, and I've probably gone over it just a little, forgive me, that's the potted version of my story. But all of it starts and all of it finishes with an underlying theme. And, you know, I was questioned by the media when I first was promoted, and they wanted to know a little bit about me. And they said, so if you had to capture it in one sentence, what would it be? How would you describe you and your role? And I didn't have to give it much thought, for I'd been living this for in my mind in terms of, you know, my role in a big organisation. And what I said was, I'm not a commissioner who just happens to be a Christian. I'm a Christian who happens to be a commissioner. Because when I finish, I won't be a commissioner anymore. I won't be a cop anymore. I'll probably live vicariously through my two sons, who are both detectives. But having said that, my association in terms of being professionally part of the organisation will finish, but I'll still be a Christian. I'll still have the same family. And that's the most important thing. So throughout all of that time, I can assure you, it was so important that I kept my eyes focused on the things that were more important. Not that those things that I was doing as Commissioner weren't important, but there were things that were more important as we go forward. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you. I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. No questions are off limits, so it's open slather, whatever you want to ask. And hopefully we will get a chance to come back and have a look at the next part of this development when you go out. Is it that direction? That direction? That direction. And set up your beautiful motel. So thank you very much. Thanks for your attention. Okay. Now, I understand that there is a roving microphone. There it is, if you can all see that over there. So perhaps if you could stick your hand up, and we'll get a mic to you, and then we can all hear. Just while that's happening, and there's a couple coming now, it's interesting, when you speak to younger people, and particularly when you speak to kids that are just sort of going on to into the high school area, they ask two questions every time, without fail. The first question always is, do you have a gun? The second one is, have you ever shot anyone? Now, I don't think that'll be a problem today. But just in case, I don't have a gun anymore, used to, I don't anymore. I never shot anyone. I used to say to our cops, the most powerful weapon we'll give you is your tongue, not your gun. It'll get you into and out of more trouble than any firearm you carry. So those two questions out of the way, we're ready to go. Sir.
Andrew, thank you very much. Appreciated what you had to share. You talked about changing culture. Presumably your culture, your vision of culture is defined by your Christian faith. What three keys would you give in terms of changing culture?
Sorry, what was your...
What three keys would you give? What three strategies? What are the three key ideas that you would use to change a culture, to influence a culture?
Okay, to change the culture. Well, look, if you're going to change the culture of an organisation, it's got to come from the top. Particularly in policing, we're a disciplined body. We understand the notion of being given an instruction and following it. We realise often that if you don't follow it, it's going to be to your detriment. That is, you'll probably be killed. You know, if there's an operation on, they'll give you orders and it'll be about making sure that we get the job done and that you're safe. It's not quite so drastic, though, when it comes to culture. But if you think about it, it's got to be owned, it's got to be well articulated, and then you need to stay committed to it. It needs to be done at the top level. And when we put together change teams back around the Royal Commission days, we created an executive change team. We brought in some outside help, but particularly we had officers that were responsible for driving it. So it needs to be owned before it can go anywhere, and it needs to be something that's passionate within, if you like, the corporate culture. But when I took on the role in 2007, I made a determined decision that we're going to get closer to the community. We were moving in really dangerous times. Terrorism was a major problem for us in New South Wales Police. The number of threats we were dealing with every day without even talking to the community because we didn't want to scare them was growing, and it was really problematic. And the strategy that's been employed around the world in terms of terrorism, with 21,000 sets of eyes and ears, you're never going to have the coverage you need in community to know what's going on in that terrorism space. You need, for us, it was 8 million sets of eyes and ears. You need people to stay in touch with you. Really difficult to do that if they didn't trust you. And you're never going to get trust unless you've got a relationship. So we had to change the culture and start to get people to focus back in on what was really important. You've heard me say it many, many times already this morning. The police force didn't own the community owned the police force. And so we needed to change the culture, but do it quickly, because we needed to get that trust so that we would get those phone calls. I used to stand up and say, if you see something, you need to tell us. Don't worry about how silly it might seem, and if you think people will laugh, we'd rather have a good laugh together with you than miss something and then have to pay the price, terrible price. So in terms of change, I had to take the police force on a journey. We put in a whole range of strategies. Probably one of the most important we did, all of our police stations, our local area commands, were headed by a superintendent. We had a range of inspectors. There were 7 inspectors that sat in the stations, that had responsibilities across the stations. They were effectively the second in charge of some of these stations. And we're talking a place, as I've mentioned, Bankstown, 350 cops, 7 inspectors, a superintendent. We actually had to start to work through that whole customer space about trying to build those relationships. And you could only do that if you were able to see the passion, understand what was being driven from headquarters, but as importantly, really get a feel for what that meant on the ground. So we actually took a range of inspectors, we put them through formal TAFE training in customer service. We got them certified to Cert 4, and we ended up having a customer service role exclusively for an inspector that would drive that across that station. We then started to do things in terms of measuring that. So we had a very comprehensive process to measure performance, not just in terms of reducing crime or staying within budget or looking after our people, but one of the most important areas was measuring interactions and that customer service focus to get a feel for where community was coming from. So I did some things which were seen as being, in the eyes of some, probably crazy. We did a lot of focus groups. We didn't do it ourselves. We actually brought a company in that did all. That was all they did. Focus groups was their key business. So I would sit behind the smoked glass in North Sydney and watch 20 people around a table talking about something they had no idea what they were talking about when they went in there. They soon realised, talking about their interactions with police. And they were people from country, city, young, old, new arrivals, first fleeters, young, you know, we went right across the state. And we did that on a number of occasions. And I'd sit there and listen to what they thought of us without them knowing I was there, warts and all. Really, really important time for us. And you know what? It wasn't as earth-shattering as I thought it could have been. I thought it would have been devastating. There wasn't a whole lot going wrong, and there wasn't much needed to be fixed to get it right. We then went to what was even seemed to be more radical. I put a secret shopper campaign in place. We hired a company to go into every police station. Again, these people that did this every day. And with the association with the police unions, I negotiated and said, we're going to go in and we're going to test that customer service interaction. And it was every police station in the state on a number of occasions, both walk-in and telephone. And it wouldn't be once. We'd be doing this and we'd keep rolling. In the last 7 years, we were doing that every year. We'd keep going. I made a comment which was interesting. I said to them, the association union said, you're just going to get complaints. I said, there will be not one complaint comes out of this. I'm not looking for complaints. I'm looking to work out what we're doing well and see how we can spread that. I'm looking to work out where our points and our centres of excellence were. And said, look, I'm actually prepared. Because these engagements were scored, the company would give me a score. They would identify the officer. I didn't know where they were going. Computer generated. We would just get a report every 3 months. This is where we've been. This is what we've done. It cost us quite a bit of money, but I tell you what, it was money well spent. I said that for every officer that gets 100%, I'll write them a personal letter, thinking that I might write maybe 15 or 20 a year. Well, I've got to tell you, on my last day of service, I signed 150 letters, and I was doing that every 3 months. There were that many officers that were getting 100% because they knew there was a secret shopper campaign, they just didn't know who it was. And they used to have competitions, you know, like, who's got a letter? Little did I know, something as small as that was going to mean so much to those people. So if I'd ever go to the bush, I'd say to my chief of staff, get me a list of all of those that have scored, let's get those certificates, get them ready. So a lot of our time would be going around having ceremonies, not putting medals on it, but giving them letters in front of their mates, setting out what they had done because they were down to that level. So when we took it from being the way it was going to happen, the culture was changing from the top, but we gave some ownership of it. We had a really crucial time. I said, if we're doing focus groups with community, we need to do them with police. And you can imagine there's a lot of very happy people in the police force, but there are many that probably aren't as happy as others. So I said, well, let's not be exclusive, bring everyone. So we would do this, it was a travelling roadshow. And I'd speak to them and sort of say, well, you know, you need to start thinking about customer service, the way you engage. I did it because I said, you know, if I don't do it, something will be lost in translation as we go down the line. And I can recall having a number of discussions with a number of these officers, and I'd say, you know, you need to start making sure that customer service is your priority. And many of them would say, why would we want to give better service to our criminals? They're protected already by legislation. They have a right to get access to people. They get access to phones. They get access to support people, lawyers. We can only question them for so many hours, then we've got to release them. So they've got, and I said, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. That's not the customers I'm talking about. Because if you do the work and you do the stats, the reality is probably 80% of the crime in New South Wales is committed by 20% of the population. I reckon it would be less than 20%. So let's not focus on the 20% if it was that. Let's focus on the 80%. I want you to deal with every person that you deal with the way you deal with your mother, or your son, or your sister, your daughter, when they walk through. If your daughter went into a police station and said, I need help, and somebody said, yeah, take a number. We'll get to you when we get to you. We're a bit busy. We've got the football league sort of playing at the moment. We just want to see how this, whether they convert this try or whatever. You'd say, that's just ridiculous. That can't happen. Well, unfortunately, in days gone by, we probably weren't as vigilant around giving the service. In New South Wales, I'm probably different here, but in New South Wales, we were driven by other priorities, is a nice way to put it. So we had to bring them back. And they actually got it when they said, you know what, that is reasonable. And so we actually started to drive that down lower, and that made a significant difference. So it wasn't about the traditional start from the top, it's got to be there, but it's also got to be owned as it goes further down. We then had to look at what that meant. What would we see coming back off the dashboard? And what we saw were things like feeling of safety in community that's put together nationally by the Crime Statistics Unit in Melbourne for the whole of Australia. And we saw our performance in that area go from being, we were the worst performing state just after 2000, where people weren't feeling safe after dark, they weren't feeling safe in their homes, they weren't feeling safe on public transport, to, I think, in 2017, we were up the top in terms, the levels weren't bad, they had about 50% were saying that they were feeling safe, or it was up around sort of 80% now. Now, what does that mean? Probably not a lot's changed, although crime rates have fallen pretty dramatically back home. What it meant was that people started to trust us more. They had that relationship, and we would see that reflected in the phone calls we were getting through in terms of countering terrorism. Some of the information we were getting was leading to enormously important arrests. Enormously important. If we hadn't have intervened then, we would have been in serious trouble. And the reality was, without those phone calls, we wouldn't have had a clue. So we were seeing in evidence what it was that we were trying to do. So it wasn't just a matter of changing culture for the sake of changing culture so we could say, well, we changed the culture. We actually needed to see a return on the investment, and we were seeing that. And that continues to this day. So, yeah, it's an important part of the business. Thank you. There's another question.
The Martin Place siege didn't play out all that well in the end, but it was no doubt a difficult situation.
Oh, look, it's never going to play out well in those situations if somebody's going to die, but the reality is in those sort of situations, somebody's going to die. I mean, I wish you could put it another way, but if you were to look at what happens when police get involved in either what we call an EA or an emergency assault or a deliberate assault, people invariably die. There was one person that was killed before we went in, and that was horrific in itself when we lost the young guy down there and Tory, and that was the reason for the trigger. There's been much conjecture about should you have gone in earlier, should you have waited. The intelligence that we were receiving from that stronghold told us that there was likely to be an explosive device in there, and if the explosive device was consistent with what we could see and what we were hearing, the blast zone would have killed everyone in that building. And if we'd have put 15 or 20 assaulters in there, they would have been killed as well. The tactical decision that was made on the day was we hold, because we don't want to put our police in a situation where they become casualties. And they waited and they waited and they waited as long as they could. And ultimately, to lose one hostage was devastating. But I've got to say, it could have been a whole lot more. Then to mount an assault, to do the work that those men did as they went through that door. They were professional, they were trained, they knew what they had to do. There's much that's been said in the media about, well, they could have done this, they should have done that. Well, that's fine. With the benefit of 20/20 hindsight and 3 years to dissect it by the millisecond, as opposed to the seconds that they had to make these calls and to get in there and do it. It's two very different environments, very different environments. And so their professionalism, I think, was something to be commended. Others were seeing it was something to be questioned. They have to go through a process, and they went through it. But I was very, very strident in my support for them because they needed our support. If you were to think about some of the nonsense that was put up in terms of what should have happened, we should have called the army in, and one sniper should have done this, and someone should have done that. That's not reality. That's not reality. We should have used this calibre weapon instead of that calibre weapon, and it all would have been well. That's not right. Not right. But people are entitled to their views, and there's always lessons to be learnt. Now, we learnt a lot of lessons from that. We also learnt that things, there was a real risk of us betraying some of the methodology to terrorists through a process that we think was probably flawed. It shouldn't have been an open coronial process to tell terrorists that we would be monitoring them, which is what came out very publicly. We monitored them, we were listening to them. Because next time there's an event like that, and God forbid you or your wife and family are caught in there, those tactics that were used on that occasion won't be of any use in the future because they know it. I mean, these people trade information. They learned from our operations, and you've seen that across the world, The first phone call I got the next day when I got home and was from New York Police. Bill Bratton was on the phone with his deputy, John Miller, who was in charge of terrorism. And they used to call me Andy. And they said, Andy, how is it that only 2 people died? Because we're expecting probably, when we looked at the numbers, we thought that probably 10 to 15. And now these are professionals. These are people that know their stuff. And that's what they're asking. So as terrible as it was, and there is no way to describe this other than a national tragedy. We lost 2 people, and we shouldn't have. Some across the world are saying you should be counting your lucky stars that you only lost 2 people. And then I'll always remember the final words of the coroner in this matter after it had all played out. He said, the only person to blame for what happened here was Man Monis. He was the person that was responsible. He was the person to blame. Having said that, again, as the Commissioner, my job was to simply say, well, these people did their best. The buck stops with me. And so I went through that process, and look, it was certainly something that was hard. But again, that's part of the turf. That's what you become the Commissioner for. There's no easy days when you're in charge of an organisation that's just dealing with drama and tragedy every day. That's the way it is. But we should always remember these guys. As I said, we used to pay these guys not what they were worth for what they did, but what they were prepared to do. And on that day, they seriously, I can tell you, they were sending messages to their families when they were forming up to go in to their wives saying, I probably won't be coming home, because they knew what the blast pattern and the zone was. I probably won't be coming home, so can you please give Mary a hug and tell her Dad loved her? I'm just looking at a photo now. These are messages that are going out from these blokes to their families saying, I'm about to go to work. And the notion that, well, you need to have people that are trained, that are, it would have been better with the army. The fellow that was in charge of that tactical operation was a 7 7-trip Afghanistan veteran, part of the TAG East Commandos at Holsworthy. He'd been over there as a commando on active duty 7 times, 7 tours, and we had him in charge on the day. And this is the whole notion of, well, if they had have had people that were trained from the military, it would have all been different. Well, we didn't go into that because we need to, protect the identity of these people. But the reality is, this is the calibre of people you had in there. That gets missed in a media environment that sort of loves the frenzy. But again, as I used to say to them, I had to go and speak to them. The day after the event, I had the Prime Minister in there with them. I had the Governor-General, I had the Governor of New South Wales, the Premier of New South Wales going in privately saying, we appreciate you, because already then there were rumblings. And if we had have had that unit say, well, you know what, it's all a little bit too hard. How about you find somebody else to do the job? Because all of their wives that we met the very next day were saying, I don't want my husband doing this work anymore. It's one thing when he goes away with the army and I don't know about it, but I'm watching this live. I don't want my husband going into that environment. Think about it. Very big ask. Very big ask. Thank you.
You may already have answered it just with the last question, but I'm interested to know about what reflections you might have on one event over all your career that's both challenged your professional skills, which are obviously well honed, but also moved, challenged, tested your faith. That one event that coincided those two things.
Great question. If you're talking about challenged my skill sets, which I think you are as a commissioner, that's an excellent question. I think I talked about it a little bit beforehand when I said the most difficult job we had, and I used to see, Joy was a partner in this with me all the way, was burying cops that had been killed. You never ever really get over it. There was a situation where we had gone from elation to a very, very low state organisationally. I said to you the 1st of March 1862, the New South Wales Police Force became the New South Wales Police Force. Well, the 1st of March 2012, we celebrated what was known as the sesquicentenary celebration of 150 years we'd been in existence. And we had a wonderful day. We got 800 people to walk up the middle of George Street, get the keys to the town hall, and we celebrated all that was right. I watched those cops come round the corner, and when the crowds that were around started to cheer and carry on, I could almost see these police grow 6 inches. They felt so good about themselves. I went to work the next day and thought, what a wonderful day, what a wonderful day. I was about to go into my first executive meeting. It was before 7, just walking in, and the Chief of Staff come and said, we've had an officer shot. I said, whereabouts? He said, Tamworth, which is a rural city. We immediately, I said, so how serious? He said, no, it's not looking good, he'll die. I said, right, well, let's get on a plane. So we got one of the planes out to the airport at Bankstown, on the aircraft up there. And I walked into the station because he was a highway patrol officer. David Rickson was his name. He was a young man. He was involved in a motor vehicle stop with a car that was known to the police up there. It was known that the driver was likely to be selling drugs, probably carrying a weapon. But David decided to stop him and wanted to obviously search him. And it was before 7. He wasn't due to start till 7, but he was already on the road. And stopped the vehicle. Now, we get the opportunity in New South Wales to see and to listen to what's going on. Every traffic car, every highway patrol car, and many of the GD's cars now have in-car video and audio as part of a range of things they have. So we could actually get to see what's happened and to listen to it. On this day, David's pulled over the car's actually driven off the street and round behind a house and come back up a driveway, and so we couldn't see the car because the highway patrol car stopped on the side of the road, but we could hear it. And in listening to it in the station, I put a set of headphones on because it was quite traumatic. You simply hear David go in and say, yeah, good morning, driver, and with that you hear bang, bang. And David Rickson's been shot twice in the stomach. And, with that, we're probably taught well, you know, you need to look to go somewhere safe. You need to start thinking about your own life, and you need to call for assistance. There's a whole range of things that we would normally do. I'd never met David Rickson, but you know, that he was typically the sort of guy that would do what I'm about to tell you. Dave Rickson, rather than run or get behind his car, has drawn his firearm. He's fired twice, so you hear bang, bang. And with that, the offender has fallen to the ground. Now, David Rickson holsters his Glock, pulls out his handcuffs and handcuffed the offender. And then Dave Rickson fell to the ground and died. The offender's on the ground, alive, moaning, and Dave's dead. And we're listening to all this live. And I think back on that, and well, the offender didn't die. So they saved his life. The police got there and started working on him, saved his life. He's just killed one of their colleagues. They saved his life. Then the ambulance got there afterwards, and he lives today. He'll live a long life in jail, because that's where he'll spend the rest of it. But having said that, I think back, and I went from the police station to David's home. I sat on a landing at the back of their house, looking out over a council park and talking with his wife and David's parents and a couple of his kids, and start thinking this has changed their life forever. Never to be the same again. Never to be the same again. Just a beautiful family, young family, and I think back in terms of the preparation that I got to manage that, and there isn't any. You know, this notion of people going in saying, look, I understand how you feel. I went in there and said, I have no idea how you feel. I've never had to go through this. I can only start to imagine how hard it must be, and it's going to get harder. So in terms of that testing my professional development, every university course I've done anywhere in the world never prepared me for that, because that had to be a heart thing. That had to be, you know, that had to be an unconditional family love situation. And we probably did pretty well. We know that we got very close to that family, and as I said, the journey doesn't finish once you actually put the person in the grave. That's when it starts. And through things like Police Legacy, where we started to care for their families. Joy, in fact, used to travel on these camps for kids that we put on, and she'd be with Dave's kids. I remember she flew home from Queensland with them in a plane once because they needed to come home early. You know, so our relationship then starts to grow. The Blue family becomes real. There was no way I could prepare for it, but I reflect now on what has happened since. There was a little girl sitting in the room that day called Gemma Rickson. Gemma sat there and howled and talked about, you know, her dad. And Gemma Rickson's now an officer in the New South Wales Police Force, working at Tamworth, where her father worked, and doing extraordinarily well. So they were the toughest times. Don't worry, it wasn't the media, it wasn't a government inquiry, it wasn't a Lint inquiry, you know. The toughest times when we had to say goodbye to good people that worked with us that were our own, really hard. And then the aftermath of that. So, folks, I think we're right on time, so thank you so much for your attention. Thanks for your questions. It's been a pleasure being here with you, and we look forward to probably spending just a little bit of time with you when we finish. And I'm getting the wind up, and he's a big fella, so I'll move on. Thanks very much.
Come walk up.